Session 3 of the Priceless Pearl. Well, I begin by saying any subject selected from this beautiful book can be a class unto itself. For this session, however, we're going to look at Shoghi Effendi's life in respect of his writings, which will bring up another book regularly recommended. You know how good I am at recommending books. The new one, the repeated one, is Shoghi Effendi, The Range and Power of His Pen. I have it here. It's a green copy. And this is a book where Ali Nachavani gave talks and answered questions when he participated in a course on the World Order of Baha'u'llah with 90 youth from 25 countries in Quito, Italy in 2003. Mr. Nachavani was one, as you know, the original member of the Universal House of Justice. He retired in 2003 after 40 years of serving in that administrative position. He did not, however, retire from service to the cause, traveling and sharing his knowledge of the faith whenever asked. Mr. Nachavani mentions the Priceless Pearl and our Rahia Khanum more than 30 times in this recommended publication. One of the questions that he was asked in Quito was, how can we systematically and realistically increase our love for Shoghi Effendi? This is Mr. Nachavani's answer. Two things are important. We should learn more about Shoghi Effendi's life. The best and most comprehensive book to read on the subject is The Priceless Pearl, the gift of Rahia Khanum to the Baha'i world. Every one of us should read this book and through it get closer to the spirit of Shoghi Effendi. We should also read Shoghi Effendi's own writings. You should not consider his writings as you would consider an article in the newspaper. You read the paper and then you throw it away. But his writings are something that should remain with you your entire life. There are many meanings and implications in the writings of Shoghi Effendi. As we read them prayerfully, we try to understand the intent of what he has written. We will thus get closer to the spirit of Shoghi Effendi and will love him even more. And of course, here is the perfect point for me to tell one of my cute little stories of Shoghi Effendi, Ali Nachavani, and little Marianne Gorski. I was having lunch near the old seat of the Universal House of Justice at an Arab restaurant when Mr. Nachavani came in and asked me why I was looking so sad. I'm making this a shorter story than I usually do. I told Ali that I hadn't known Shoghi Effendi when he was alive because I didn't hear about Baha'u'llah till 1961. And as we know, he passed away in 1957. So, Mr. Nachavani, I won't know him in the next world. Oh, yes, you will, said Ali Nachavani. I said, no, Ali. He'll be so far up there near the threshold of Baha'u'llah, and I'll be someplace down there. And no, I won't. He said, yes, Marianne, you will know Shoghi Effendi. He said, it's like Baha'u'llah when he walked upon the earth. People knew him, but they didn't know him. And that'll be with you, Marianne. You will know Shoghi Effendi, but you won't know him, which is what Baha'u'llah meant when he said They that are of a lower grade, however, are incapable of comprehending adequately the station or of estimating the merits of those that rank above them. Now, let's jump into the ocean of the Guardian's writing, and I've brought up a pail of some gems of his writings, his messages, his interpretations, and his book, singular, that Rahia Khanum wrote about in The Priceless Pearl, as this is one of our main themes, the writings of Shoghi Effendi. As we read these notes and contemplate on what we hear, we know that another side theme that cannot be missed is the sufferings of Shoghi Effendi. You just can't read The Priceless Pearl without constantly being educated on what he sacrificed to do for us what he was meant to do. So let's begin with that one book, God Passes By. We might repeat that Neda gave a long series of Zoom sessions on this, what Rahia Khanum calls the centennial review of the Baha'i faith in her diary. When I mention this one book from the pen of Shoghi Effendi, I always relate how Rahia Khanum used to regularly say that he wrote it in 9 months, while at the same time guiding the believers, tending to the needs of the World Center property, developing its institutions, protecting the faith, etc. And I share the story of asking Rahia Khanum during one of her talks at the World Center how Shoghi Effendi was able to produce God Passes By in 9 months when it took me 2 years just to type it. True, I was doing it on my own time, but there's a lot of hours on the weekends, in the mornings and the evenings in 2 years. And I'm a fast typist. And all I had to do was copy the text, not write it. And it took me 2 years to type it. Reading about The Priceless Pearl now, you may be moved to tears. Indeed, in Rahia Khanum's excerpts of The Priceless Pearl, that can happen. Look at 2 particular pages, pages 162 and 163. Most of the believers are not aware of what was happening to the Guardian and around the Guardian when he was writing or translating for us and to us. One of those 2 pages not just talks about the Guardian's extreme tiredness, but how he had to deal with the covenant breakers within his family. Rahia Khanum gives the example of one covenant breaker who had died, and his widow wanted Shoghi Effendi to recognize her husband's will, accept money from the faith, for the faith, and most importantly, she wanted to give Shoghi Effendi the seals of Baha'u'llah that Abdul Baha had entrusted to her care. The Guardian would have none of it, as much as he would like to have had those seals of Baha'u'llah. The Guardian would not even see the woman unless she cut herself off entirely from the covenant breaker family. In the diary, Rahia Khanum wondered why the woman hadn't given the Guardian those precious seals during the 23 years that had passed since the Master's ascension. There were also other things outside the faith that affected the Guardian. While Shoghi Effendi was writing God Passes By, 2 army planes touched wings, lost control, flew dangerously over the very roof of the Master's house, and crashed 100 yards away. What would it have done to the faith if Shoghi Effendi had been damaged or killed in that crash. There was the invasion of Egypt and their needing to make the decision to stay or to go. Rahia Khanum is constantly putting us in the scene to better understand the demands of the guardian's life as head of the cause of God, the faith of Baha'u'llah. She said he was no glory seeker, no lover of the limelight. This from her diary. Everyone who knew the true story of Shoghi Effendi's life would weep. Weep for his goodness. Weep for his pure, simple heart. Weep for his labors and his cares. Weep for the long, long years in which he has toiled ever more alone, ever more persecuted by those around him. The next entry in her diary is almost a year later, and she writes, I am really worried over Shoghi Effendi. When he used to get so very distressed and upset in the past, it affected him, but not as it does now. Sometimes I think it will lead to his premature death. He breathes so hard, almost like one who has been running. And he has such huge shadows under his eyes. He forces himself to go on and finish the letters he has piled for days on his desk. But he reads a thing sometimes 10 minutes over and over because he can't concentrate. I think no suffering is worse than seeing someone you love suffer, and I can't remedy it. All I wonder is how God can stand to see him suffer so. Of course, we know he did have a premature death, whereas Baha'u'llah had a lifespan of 75 years and Abdu'l-Baha 77 years. Shoghi Effendi died at 60. Some of you know Florence Mayberry. She was part of the Guardian's last pilgrim group in 1957. In her book, The Great Adventure, she records this about saying goodbye to Shoghi Effendi at the conclusion of her pilgrimage. He turned, walked away. For the first time, I viewed him with his back turned. Only then did I think of the Guardian as tired. His shoulders sloped slightly as though weighed by an unseen heavy burden. My heart twinged, and I wished that somehow the burden would lift, that he could rest. Little did we all know that that rest was pretty much around the corner. By the time he put God Passes By in our hands in 1944, he still had 13 years of laboring for the cause of God. Rahia Khanum would tell us how the Guardian typed on a small portable typewriter. You will see that in one of the photos following page 116 of the Priceless Pearl. She said that there were several carbons beneath the top page, pre-machine copy days. After a page was full, they would spread the page and the carbons out on the table, and each read them for any corrections needed. Think of the thousands of diacritical marks in God Passes By. They probably were all put on the pages by hand by the publisher, for the publisher. That small typewriter was not high-tech. An aside, when the World Center went computerized, it used impact printers with print wheels. To accommodate diacritical marks, the World Center had a special print wheel developed by a company in Switzerland. In order for the company to do that for us, we had to buy many hundreds of these specialized print wheels. As occurred, however, only a few were used, as technology rapidly advanced to laser printers. Although the main purpose was to gift God Passes By to the believers on the occasion of the 100th year anniversary of the faith, the book served many purposes. Shortly after its release, in a period of more problems for the faith, he wrote in a cablegram to America. He wrote a cablegram to America, not a letter that would take weeks to reach the National Assembly. Here's what the Guardian said in that cablegram. The occasion, meaning these problems for the faith at the time, the occasion demands that you direct special attention to passages in God Passes By, indicating the gravity of the past crisis precipitated since the inception of the faith by kingsmen, both of the manifestation and the center of the covenant, demonstrating the pitiful futility of their nefarious activities and the sad fate overtaking defectors and betrayers. You will find that in Messages to America on page 75. From Rahia Khanum's diary, we learn that years later, the Guardian had an occasion to meet with Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister of Israel, who upon ending the meeting, asked if there was a history of the cause that he could read. He was sent God Passes By. So much to relate on God Passes By, so little time. You will learn for yourself more of its history and impact when you read or reread The Priceless Pearl. Moving on to other writings of Shoghi Effendi, I'll mention some in chronological order and briefly quote from The Priceless Pearl. Two basic books are undoubtedly on every believer's bookshelf. They were the first books that I bought in respect of the revelation when I was a new believer, though I didn't understand much. In retrospect, it was because I didn't know the history of the faith, which is really critical to understanding the writings. The first of these two books that the Guardian sent to America in 1935, Gleanings from the Writings of Baha'u'llah, 165 translated tablets from the pen of the latest divine spokesman from the Almighty God. Although Shoghi Effendi sent copies to significant people in his life and received appreciation in return, it was Queen Marie of Romania's words that Rahia Khanum tells us meant so much to the Guardian. The first member of royalty to declare belief in Baha'u'llah told Martha Root, her spiritual teacher, even doubters would find a powerful strength in it if they would read it alone and would give their souls time to expand. The second book, of course, the mate to Gleanings from 1936-37, is Prayers and Meditations of Baha'u'llah. That book covers 184 translated selections, the last one being 16 pages long. One of his professors who received a copy wrote Shoghi Effendi, the translation of deep and poetic thoughts, such as those in Prayers and Meditation, requires an enormous amount of hard work. I have told you before how much I marvel when I see the quality of English that you use. Another of his professors wrote Shoghi Effendi, you have mastered English in such a remarkable way that I am sure the sayings do not lose their meaning and charm because of translation. Lest you think that all the words flowed freely with the divine guidance he was promised, Rahia Khanum more than once, and it's in the Priceless Pearl, spoke of how Shoghi Effendi searched out the most accurate word to convey his meaning. This will be mentioned again. Some of his books are actually messages. Rahia Khanum specifically mentions the advent of divine justice. 77 pages to the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. Again, lest you think that he wrote it leisurely in the comfort of his own living quarters, Rahia Khanum tells us, it was written during the year the Guardian remained in Europe owing to terrorist activities in Palestine, and was addressed to the Baha'is of the United States and Canada. She used to tell us how in those days of war with the new state of Israel, especially the independence, that there would be little Arab boys with brass platters selling hand grenades. But this message, the advent of divine justice that was sent to our National Assembly, is periodically recommended that we study it again. You will understand why we're told to study it again if you read page 220 of the Priceless Pearl. Just one sentence says a lot. I'll read that one sentence. She learned from the Guardian how to get a lot into one sentence. With a kind but firm hand, Shoghi Effendi held up before the face of the North American community the mirror of the civilization by which they were surrounded, and warned them in terms that riveted the eye and chilled the heart against its evils, pointing out to them a truth few of them have ever pondered, namely, that the very evils of that civilization were the mystic reason for their homeland having been chosen by God as the cradle of his world order in this day. Wow. Next is The Promised Day Has Come. It's another letter, 1941, 136-page letter to the Baha'is of the West. She wrote this. He communicated with the Baha'is because he had something to say that was important, because he was appointed to guide them, because he was the custodian of the faith of Baha'u'llah. He was impelled by forces stronger than himself over which he had no control. Though it comes before the other messages, books, the World Order of Baha'u'llah is a series of messages he wrote between 1929 and 1936. He says this, designed to clarify for the believers the true meaning and purpose of their faith, its tenets, its implications, its destiny and future, and to guide the unfolding and slowly maturing community in North America and in the West to a better understanding of its duties, its privileges, and its destiny. A section of this book that gets special attention, The World Order of Baha'u'llah, are pages 97 to 157. 61 pages titled the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Rahia Khanum references it when the believers asked why the guardian never wrote a will. Shoghi Effendi said that he had said everything that needed to be said in that 1934 message, the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. In one of our previous Zoom sessions organized by our dear Neda, we told the story of an early believer, Emmerich Salah, when he was on pilgrimage, and he asked a lot of questions of the guardian. And then the guardian asked him a question. First, the guardian said, soon after the martyrdom of the Bab, the authority of the faith was passed on to Baha'u'llah. And after his passing, to Abdu'l-Baha. Then he asked the pilgrim, whom was it transferred after the ascension of Abdu'l-Baha? And Emmerich said, well, to you, Shoghi Effendi. And guardian, no. Oh, the guardian, no. And then he said, I ventured to say the Universal House of Justice. He said, I could tell the guardian was so disappointed that he didn't know the answer. He said, are the believers not reading my messages? The answer is in the world order of Baha'u'llah, clearly stated in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. He said it's divided into 4 parts: Baha'u'llah, the Bab, Abdu'l-Baha, and the 4th part is entitled World Order of Baha'u'llah, which is the answer to his question. I last night started rereading a book, text for the study of the covenant. It's a convenient compilation of 3 documents. It relates to what I've just said. The first document is the Kitabiyat, the Book of the Covenant, where Baha'u'llah says, turn to Abdu'l-Baha. The second is the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha, where in the 3 parts he speaks of the process of the world order, including the guardianship and the House of Justice. The third is the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi telling us that we turn to the world order of Baha'u'llah. What did Ali Nachivani tell us about the need to study the meanings and implications of Shoghi Effendi's writings? The last paragraph of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, I'm sorry if this is rather long, but I think it deserves to be read in its entirety. Notice Shoghi Effendi's style. Notice how Shoghi Effendi compacts the key points, proving that the world order is the successor to Abdu'l-Baha and not himself. This is the last paragraph of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. Let no one, while this system is in its infancy, misconceive its character, belittle its significance, or misrepresent its purpose. The bedrock on which the administrative order is founded by God's immutable purpose for mankind in this day. The source from which it derives its inspiration is no one less than Baha'u'llah himself. Its shield and defender are the embattled host of the Abha kingdom. Its seed is the blood of no less than 20,000 martyrs who have offered up their lives that it may be born and flourish. The axis around which its institutions revolve are the authentic provisions of the Will and Testament of Abdu'l-Baha. Its guiding principles are the truths which he who is the unerring interpreter of the teachings of our faith had so clearly enunciated in his public addresses throughout the West. The laws that govern its operation and limit its functions addressed are those which have been expressly ordained in the Kitabi Akdas. The seat round which its spiritual, its humanitarian, and administrative activities will cluster are the Masrical Askar and its dependencies. The pillars that sustain its authority and buttress its structure are the twin institutions of the guardianship and the Universal House of Justice. The central and underlying aim which animates it is the establishment of the New World Order, and adumbrated by Baha'u'llah. The methods it employs, the standard it takes, incline it to neither East or West, neither Jews nor Christians, neither rich nor poor, neither white nor colored. Its watchword is the unification of the human race. Its standard, the most great peace. Its consummation, the advent of that golden millennium, the day when the kingdoms of the world shall have become the kingdom of God, the kingdom of Baha'u'llah. How all-encompassing in history and a world vision. If you think you know the oneness of mankind, another publication I was reading just this morning, it's called Reflections. And no, I take that back. That's another thing. I won't bother reading it. It's in the World Order of Baha'u'llah. Well, actually, it isn't this. It's copying the World Order of Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi has a long paragraph in the World Order of Baha'u'llah under the section, the goal of reflecting a new world order. Is that what it's called? I can't read my own notes, friends. The goal of a new world order. He gives a long paragraph on what the oneness of mankind is all about. Just like you don't know the world order is now the successor of Abdu'l Baha, we really don't understand the importance of the oneness of mankind. But read page 42 of the World Order of Baha'u'llah and re-educate all of us on the guardian telling us the true meaning and purpose of the oneness of mankind. Rahia Khanum has other publications that she mentions in the Priceless Pearl. The Golden Age of the Cause of Baha'u'llah, America and the Most Great Peace, the Unfoldment of World Civilization. But there are two other books that are exceptionally different, exceptionally significant. They required translating and editing by Shoghi Effendi. One of these two books, Rahia Khanum writes in the Priceless Pearl. It is really during the 1930s that one sees a change manifest in Shoghi Effendi's writings. With the rapier of his pen in hand, he now stands forth revealed as a giant. So we don't get confused. Rahia Khanum said that God Passes By was the only book the Guardian wrote, even though his messages are so long that they come across in a book. But the two books that are translated and edited are very important. One is the Kitab-i-Igan, the Book of Certitude. In the foreword, Shoghi Effendi gives us only 2 sentences. This is one more attempt to introduce to the West, in language however inadequate, this book of unsurpassed preeminence among the writings of the author of the Baha'i Revelation. The hope is that it may assist others in their efforts to approach what must always be regarded as an unattainable goal, a befitting rendering of Baha'u'llah's matchless utterance. But Rahia Khanum wrote of this translation, this was the first of his major translations. Baha'u'llah's great exposition on the station and role of the manifestations of God, more particularly in the light of Islamic teachings and prophecies. known as the Kitab-i-Igan, or Book of Certitude. It was an invaluable adjunct to the Western Baha'is in their study of the faith, that they embraced and infinitely enriched their understanding of divine revelation. Again, a book that has to be read your entire lifetime. The other book, a companion, is The Dawnbreakers, Nabil's narrative of the early days of the Baha'i revelation. On page 215 of the Priceless Pearl, Rahia Khanum likens its rendering to that of Fitzgerald's rendering of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, which gave to the world, this is Rahia Khanum, which gave to the world a poem in a foreign language that in many ways far exceeded the merits of the original. In other words, Shoghi Effendi put into the Dawnbreakers more than Nabil might have anticipated in its eventual publication. That's what translators do. He didn't translate word for word. He translated the spirit of the history, or the law, or the principle, or the truth. Shoghi Effendi sent the Dawnbreakers to prominent people and received back deeply deserved praise. They were from men who knew him and recognized the brilliance of the translation and editing. I'd like to read some of them, but you will have the pleasure yourself. An interesting fact of the book is its declaration, its dedication. It falls into the very purpose of the book. To the greatest holy leaf, the last survivor of a glorious and heroic age, I dedicate this work in token of a great depth of gratitude and love. With the passing of the greatest holy leaf, that was the end of the heroic age, and the Dawnbreakers was all about the heroic age. In a letter to Martha Root, outstanding American Baha'i teacher, designated by Abdu'l-Baha as the herald of the kingdom, Shoghi Effendi wrote what its production meant to him. We also learn a bit of history of the central figures. From the Priceless Pearl, sharing part of his letter to Martha Root, Rahia Khanum writes, Shoghi Effendi himself described what the Dawnbreakers is and what its production has meant to him. Now it's the Guardian. I have just completed, after 8 months of continuous and hard labor, the translation of the history of the early days of the cause, and have sent the manuscript to the American National Assembly. The work comprises about 600 pages and 200 pages of additional notes that I have gleaned during the summer months from different books. I have been so absorbed in this work that I can hardly write. The record is an authentic one, and deals chiefly with the Bab. Parts of it have been read by Baha'u'llah and been revised by Abdu'l-Baha. I am so overcome with fatigue caused by the long and severe strain of the work that I have undertaken, that I must stop and lie down. I sense that Shoghi Effendi could write so intimately of his weariness because he had, shall we say, a kindred spirit. Martha Root also gave exhaustedly of her physical and mental being and her spiritual essence in service to the cause. We might just here interject Ali Nachavani's statistics of the correspondence of the Guardian's 36-year ministry. This is just his correspondence. 11,345 in English, 12,308 in Persian Arabic, 9,000 cable messages, totaling 32,653 pieces. I have yet to meet a Baha'i who has found Shoghi Effendi's writings easy to read. My own thoughts on this issue. He wanted to be precise and explicit. Rahia Khanum tells us how he searched for the right word to convey exactly what the believers needed to understand. She wrote, although he had such a brilliant command of language, he frequently reinforced his knowledge by certainty through looking up the word he planned to use in Webster's Big Dictionary. Often one of my functions was to hand it to him, and it was a mighty weighty tome indeed. Not infrequently, his choice would be the third or fourth usage of the word, sometimes bordering on the archaic, but it was the exact word that conveyed his meaning, so he used it. The next sentence is a truth that I often quote and repeat. Rahia Khanum says this, I remember my mother once saying that to become a Baha'i was like entering a university, only one never finished learning, never graduated. Very true. In the 1970s, Amateur Baha'i Rahia Khanum was invited to speak at a youth conference in Wilmette. One of the things she said to the youth, and these are my words, because she told us she did say this, was that she couldn't understand what they were talking about, that they were not using English language as she knew it. Then she said that if they wanted to know how to speak good English, they should read Shoghi Effendi's writings. They applauded her. In my own reading, it was in the 1970s that Nell Golden and I each subscribed to Time magazine. I was particularly interested in the arts. I would read all the reviews of music, books, and plays. But I remember one afternoon telling Nell that I had a hard time knowing if the reviews were favorable or not. Because of the modern jargon, I didn't know if it was good or bad. Other thoughts in respect of Shoghi Effendi's writings being difficult to read. I believe that each generation of future Baha'is will have been educated with his writings and will undoubtedly have more advantages to understanding and speaking. And of course, I had to appreciate that how he wrote and what he wrote always led me to other books and especially his other writings, all of which gradually improved my knowledge. Also, we may not in this century understand English being a language of importance. A few years ago, the Universal House of Justice wrote us that said, it appears that English is the temporary universal language. In a world-centered talk, Ali Nachivani told us that before God passes by, the Persian believers thought that the year 19 was the more important, as it was the year Baha'u'llah made his declaration. When that book came out, Ali said, the Guardian educated us that it was the year 9 that was of more importance, because that was the year and Baha'u'llah was in the Sia Shah, the Black Pit of Tehran, when he received the intimation of his revelation, which began his 40-year ministry. I remember Ali Nachivani saying, if that was not the truth, then one of the prophecies would not have been fulfilled, which was that the the ministry of Baha'u'llah would be equal to Moses's wandering in the desert, which was 40 years. Friends, Shoghi Effendi has not been physically with us for almost 70 years, and yet his writings are as pertinent today as they were when they were written. They will never go away during the thousands of years of Baha'u'llah's dispensation. The Guardian conveyed the truths of the past, explained what we were going through contemporaneously, and thrust us into the future. And then there are the authentic translations of the sacred writings of the central figures of the faith, especially the revelation of Baha'u'llah, destined to change the world and mankind, to establish the most great peace and the world order of Baha'u'llah. As with the second session, I'd like to close this third one with words again directly from the Priceless Pearl. From the earliest days of his ministry, Shoghi Effendi set about creating order in what was then a very small Baha'i world, barely existing in some of the 35 countries which had received at least a ray of illumination from the light of Baha'u'llah. The great guiding lines were clear in his mind, and as he grew older and the community of believers grew and increased in experience, these lines became clearer and details were added. Abdu'l-Baha himself, in his will and testament, had foreshadowed this unfoldment when he said of the Guardian that day by day he may wax greater in happiness, in joy, and spirituality, and may grow to become even as a fruitful tree. Thank you.
When you're talking about the Guardian's writings, I remember thinking about reading Baha'u'llah and its majesty, and its and Abdu'l-Baha as a kindly father who spoke in terms that any of us could readily understand and yet still so profound. And for me, reading The Guardian is like diamonds. I don't know how to say that about diamonds, but there's qualities of diamonds that we all have impressions of treasure, of brightness, and I can't think of any single word that better describes the Guardian's writings. Particular his own writings, and what you said about all of that I've heard before, but it's always good to hear again. And thank you so much, dear friend.
Welcome, Dennis. I said that Shoghi Effendi's writings lead me to read other things, but I actually also use that knowledge with the writings of Baha'u'llah. He talked about the Crimean War. I had to go out and buy the latest book on the Crimean War, which was that thick. I read every page, and only two good things came out of it, which was Florence Nightingale and the poem, the Light Brigade. Otherwise, it was just a 2-year war. Somebody said something?
I think it's the charge of the Light Brigade.
Yes, yeah. I guess my hand is up and no one's saying anything, so I'm going to say something. Marianne, I am so indebted to you for your presentations. It's been like the highlight of my week every week. I've had the fortune to go on pilgrimage twice and hope to go again. But the love you have for our faith, the commitment you have, the consecration, the absolute knowledge that it's the truth and that's the way forward is just, I don't know, it just touches my heart. So I'm incredibly grateful. And I just want to let you know. And your study of the text and the books is so exciting too. And so I did want to ask if you could just show that book again that had I think it said text on the top. When it said it had the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, the Kitabi Ad. Oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't a very expensive book. And the three things are in other books, but this compiled it, that if you want to know the succession of the faith of Baha'u'llah.
Document. Yeah.
And like I say, you read this over and over. This is where one of my favorite quotes of the Guardian is, and it's in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. The House of Justice used it in a message before I left the World Center, so it sticks in my mind. This is what Shoghi Effendi wrote to us. The section begins, "Dearly beloved friends," and then the next paragraph is, "To strive to obtain a more adequate understanding of the significance of Baha'u'llah's stupendous revelation must, in my unalterable conviction, remain the first obligation and the object of the constant endeavor of each one of its loyal adherents. An exact and thorough comprehension of so vast a system, so sublime a revelation, so sacred a trust, is for obvious reasons beyond the reach and ken of our finite minds. We can, however, and it is our bolden duty, to seek to derive fresh inspiration and added sustenance as we labor for the propagation of his faith through a clear apprehension of the truths it enshrines and the principles on which it is based." You know, I think last time one of the friends gave me an opportunity to say something that it took me a long time to know what was happening in my own life. We're promised that if we arise to serve this cause, the concourse on high will come to our assistance. So little old Marianne didn't just get this knowledge because she was studying the writing so deeply. I was being assisted with this promise that I would be guided to understanding. It's, to me, my little Gorski miracle.
Thanks for sharing those chalices of light that the concourse on high is giving you.
I've had tests in my life, even at the World Center. Rahia Khadem said that the Guardian once said, "The higher you are asked to serve, the greater are your tests." When the House of Justice asked me one year to recruit for the World Center by attending as many summer schools that I could at the time, I would repeat that to the people who were applying for possibly coming to the World Center. And then I would say, what then would you think serving at the World Center would be like? If the higher you are asked to serve, the greater are your tests. I can tell you personally that that great test is usually yourself. It's how you react. It's how you deal with situations, both the goods and the bads. So don't think that I lived 16 years at the World Center as an angel. I wasn't. I wasn't a devil.
Mary, and I feel as though I just want to have a long conversation about each one.
I'm always available for the friends. I just love sharing this revelation, and I've learned from the best, and that's what I try to convey. is the Ali Nachivanis, the Ian Simples that affected my life
Mm.
would affect your life through me, if nothing else.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you know, I mentioned the books that Ali Nachivani in particular write, or they write about him. I don't have any books on Ian Simple. I haven't seen any books on Ian Simple yet, but certainly there will be.
Mm. Mm. I came across this lovely quotation from Ian Semple. I'm not sure where I got it from, about consultation and how he was talking about his experience of it in the Universal House of Justice, and how all of a sudden it would take off and there'd be something new that would emerge from it. And it was such a beautiful description. And I don't think, well, I've sort of experienced it a little bit. It's a little bit like group wisdom that comes through, but he expressed it so eloquently. It was just a beautiful quotation. And
He was
It
a
was quite-
brilliant mind,
I can imagine.
brilliant mind.
Yeah.
Ali Nachivani said, of all the members of the Universal House of Justice that we appreciate the most, it's Ian Simple.
Yes.
That when there is a subject for consultation, he goes straight to the issue. He is not swayed by anything on either issues. And for somebody like Ali Nachivani to say that
Mm.
about a younger Baha'i, because Ian was the youngest member of the House of Justice.
Wow.
And Ali Nachivani was, of course, a seasoned Baha'i teacher who grew up in the presence of Shoghi Effendi.
Mm. I'd love you to talk one day about LSAs, and there's such a, I read somewhere that I think it was Mr. Tahizadeh said, being on the LSA is a form of martyrdom. And that resonated really strongly for me, because I've really found it found it a challenge, you know, because of my own sort of issues, I suppose.
Well, the institutions are all at different evolving stages.
Yeah.
We're not the future creation that God is going to raise. We're just the humble pebbles that are the foundation of these future well-organized institutions.